So why should anyone care what I have to talk about? Most cats do nothing all day except sleep or roam around the house aimlessly. I think that the reason most cats live quiet lives of desperation is because they do not remember their past lives. And just like humans, they fall into frequent bouts of desperation. I have witnessed these many times over the years. Fortunately, I have been lucky enough to have been reincarnated into very special homes, to very special masters, poets, writers, musicians, and thinkers mostly. I do not know the reason I should be so fortunate, however. Why is it that I can remember my past lives, and yet my master? You know, I'm done with that word. Instead, I'll just call him D. Perhaps the word master is a bit antiquated anyway. And so it is that words like distant relatives come and go out of fashion. Yes, I have slept in the houses of some of the most respected thinkers ever to have lived. Indeed, I slept a lot. But I was not always sleeping, and sometimes I was listening. This is the reason I am so smart for a cat. Yes, I listen, and that is how I learn. Unless I am being purposefully and systematically deceived for reasons of which I am totally ignorant. That may be so, but at least I can say that I have learned the error of my ways from experts. One thing that I have invariably learned in my many lifetimes is that humans are devious. And they seldom say what they mean, nor do they mean what they say. I was once owned by a very important bishop within the church during the Middle Ages, when plain chant was popular. Relaxing and beautiful, I loved this music, and I would walk around outside the cathedral late at night, hoping to hear it. I knew that there were certain hours when I would be most likely to hear it, but I did not know what those hours were. So I wandered, and I tried to stay in the shadows, lest I be spotted by the authorities. Or worse, by those who wished to eat me. For this was a time of want and a time of need. The bishop lived a frugal life, though his position and power should have elevated his style of living far above the average person. I took this to understand that he was a good man, a man of honor. His dress was understandably strange, for he dressed far different than other people, but his clothes were almost all black. He ate little, and for the most part out of my sight, so I cannot vouch for his dietary habits. Much of his time was spent reading. I didn't really understand what reading was, but I soon learned that he was extracting some form of information and that such information was essential to his office. He would walk around carrying books, and people looked at him with respect. One day, while I lay on the rug napping, I overheard a conversation between two powerful musicians that were visiting the bishop. Most of their talking was about erudite subjects dealing with the fundamentals of music, and I found it hard to keep listening. But then I heard something that caught my attention. They were talking about conjuring the devil. I was sure of it. I did not know what the devil was, but I knew that it was bad. The bishop was not in the room when this conversation was happening, and that caused me even greater alarm, for I knew that they were plotting. They spoke of the devil's interval, but I knew that the devil's interval could only be dangerous because they were very careful when speaking of it. It was then that I decided to denounce them to the bishop when we were alone. As I have already said, the bishop was a good man. Of that I knew. He was mostly quiet and only spoke to me in innocuous phrases. Occasionally he would pet me when he fed me. But I could tell that there was much on his mind, and his powerful silence was an indication of his bearing. He had just finished his prayer, and that is when I told him. A look of absolute fear came over him at the sound of my voice that I later found out, so frightened was he that he forced himself to endure self-flagellation and nearly died of the procedure. At first, I did not know what self-flagellation was. But when I saw him whipping himself with long leather strips, I understood. After that, I no longer spoke to him, for I knew that he must be very frightened of the devil. I loved him even more because of his vulnerability. In truth, I was worried about him, so I started following him through the long, dark corridors of the church. This is when I grew to love this form of music, for I felt elated, and I sensed the sublime nature of what I would later discover was an act of worship. I could not have known that it was I that he was frightened of, nor could I have imagined that he was convinced that it was I that was the devil. He began to avoid me, and when he would feed me, he would no longer pet me. Those were dark days for me, and I began to feel sorry for myself. And that is when I knew that cats were not allowed to speak. He always remained kind to me and showed no animosity. But there was always an uneasiness about him when I was in the room. I have always associated his kindness and his profound silence with his deep faith in his religion. And I have always had a soft spot in my heart for the deep, spiritual music of his church. And even though I do not understand spiritual aspects very well, I think that it is derived from a profound reflection. Hope. But even hope may die. My last days of my former life as a church cat were terrible and sad. Even as I was seized and murdered by the frenzied villagers. For cats were thought to be portents of evil in league with the devil. Cats were hated, but they were much feared too. So much pain and death I saw before the end. And yet the people danced. The dance macabre. Yes, this is true. The people danced. And as if fallen victim to some mass hysterical force, even during the most horrific days of the plague, the people danced until, overcome with exhaustion, they collapsed to the ground and died. The plague took what it wanted and left the rest to die in slow horror. Entire villages were left dead and abandoned as the plague swept across the land like an apocalypse. I always find it strange that the most horrific events that befall the land are sometimes a catalyst for the most sublime art and literature. But it was the music that I remember from the church, which helped me want to survive. And that is a form of hope, I suppose. Udo.